In the rugged, windswept coastal town of Port Oakhaven, the sea dictated the rhythm of life. The ocean could be a generous friend, offering bountiful catches of silver-scaled fish, or a cruel thief, swallowing boats and battering the rocky shores with unforgiving storms. Because of this harsh unpredictability, a heavy blanket of anxiety often rested over the townsfolk. Yet, amidst the gray skies and salty mist, there was one constant source of warmth, an elderly man named Elias. Elias was the retired keeper of the Oakhaven Lighthouse. Though years of staring into the blinding coastal winds had stolen his eyesight, leaving his eyes a cloudy, pale blue, he saw the world with more clarity than anyone else in town. Elias lived in a small, weathered cottage at the base of the lighthouse cliffs. His face was a map of deep, sun-baked crevices, but it was almost always arranged in an expression of profound serenity. He walked with a heavy driftwood cane, his steps slow but certain. The townspeople held a deep reverence for him. On days when the fishing nets came up empty, or when the winter frosts ruined the small hillside crops, people would naturally gravitate toward Elias's porch. He never had any money to offer, nor could he physically help repair a torn sail, but he offered something much rarer, an unbreakable, radiant optimism. He would sit on his wooden rocking chair, listening to the crashing waves, and speak words that seemed to carry the very light he used to tend in the tower. Life in Port Oakhaven was exceptionally difficult that year. The autumn gales had arrived weeks early, keeping the fishing fleets docked and cutting off the town's primary source of income. Fears spread through the narrow cobblestone streets like a contagion. Blacksmiths had no tools to mend, bakers had no flour to buy, and the local market was eerily quiet. It was an environment perfectly suited for despair. Yet, Elias remained untouched by the collective gloom. When neighbors complained about the howling wind, he would simply smile and remark on how beautifully it cleared the stagnant air. His unwavering positivity was a mystery to many, but to those who were drowning in their own worries, his small porch was the only safe harbor in 1,000 miles. In a drafty wooden cabin on the edge of the town, a young woman named Clara felt her spirit crumbling. Clara was a skilled weaver, relying on her large wooden loom to create heavy woolen blankets that she sold at the market. However, with the town's economy frozen, no one was buying blankets. Worse still, her husband, Arthur, a carpenter, had left 3 months prior on a merchant ship bound for the bustling capital city across the bay. He had promised to find lucrative work repairing the city docks, and to send money back before the deep winter set in. But 90 days had passed, and Clara had received nothing, no coin, no letter, no word of his safety. One bitterly cold Tuesday, Clara reached her breaking point. She sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the meager portion of dried oats left in her pantry. Her 2 young sons, Leo and Toby, were huddled near the fireplace, shivering in their sleep as the dying embers struggled to fight off the draft. Clara's hands, calloused and sore from working the loom, trembled as she buried her face in them. Her mind was a dark, swirling vortex of terrifying questions. What if Arthur's ship went down in the autumn gales? What if he abandoned us? How will I feed my boys when the snows come? We are going to freeze. The negative thoughts piled upon her like heavy stones, crushing her chest and making it difficult to even draw a breath. Unable to bear the suffocating silence of her cold cabin, Clara threw a shawl over her shoulders and rushed out into the biting wind. She didn't know where she was going at first, letting her desperate feet guide her. Almost instinctively, she found herself climbing the steep, rocky path toward the lighthouse. When she reached Elias's cottage, she found the old man sitting by his door, his face turned upward to catch the faint rays of the morning sun. Clara collapsed onto the wooden steps, the dam finally breaking. She sobbed uncontrollably, her tears freezing on her cheeks. Elias did not interrupt her. He simply reached out his weathered, warm hand and placed it gently on her trembling shoulder, waiting for the storm inside her to pass. "I am drowning, Elias," Clara finally choked out, her voice ragged and raw. "Arthur is gone. He's been gone for 3 months. I have no money, my boys are hungry, and my loom sits silent. I don't know what to do anymore. She looked up at his blind, peaceful eyes, desperate for him to magically fix her reality. I wake up every single night in a cold sweat. I can already see us starving. I can see the debt collectors taking our home. I feel like there is a heavy black cloud sitting right on top of me, and it's pressing me into the dirt. Elias patted her shoulder softly, his thumb moving in slow, comforting circles. Take a deep breath, Clara. Smell the salt in the air. Feel the solid wood of these steps beneath you. He paused, letting her calm down just a fraction. Tell me, my dear, where is your mind living right now? Clara blinked, confused by the question. Living? It's living in a nightmare, Elias. I am thinking about what will happen to us when the food runs out next week. Ah, Elias murmured, nodding slowly. You are living in a tomorrow that has not yet arrived, and you are decorating it with your darkest fears. Clara, when we feed our minds with shadows, our hearts become too heavy to carry us forward. You are suffering not just from your current lack of food, but from 100 imaginary tragedies that haven't even happened. Clara frowned, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But how can I not think of those things? The danger is real. The hunger is real. How can I possibly think happy thoughts when my reality is so terrifyingly bleak? Elias smiled gently, a look of deep, ancient understanding crossing his face. Let me tell you a story about the sea, Clara. A story about a man who lost everything, only to find exactly what he needed. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, leaning in as Elias began his tale. Many years ago, Elias said, his voice a rich, gravelly baritone over the sound of the crashing waves, there was a proud merchant captain named Silas. Silas owned a magnificent vessel filled with precious silks and spices. He tied his entire identity, his entire sense of joy, to that ship. One night, a monstrous storm caught him off the jagged coast of the Widow's Reef. The ship was torn to matchsticks. Silas washed ashore on a desolate, rocky island, battered and alone. For a week, Silas sat on the cold sand, weeping. He stared out at the ocean, agonizing over his lost riches. He told himself, I am ruined. I will die here alone. The sea has taken my life. Elias leaned forward. A week passed, and Silas was indeed near death from thirst and despair. But one morning, he forced himself to stop looking at the empty horizon and instead looked down at the beach. The shore was littered with the wreckage of his ship, planks of wood, torn canvas, tangled ropes. As long as he thought of it as a destroyed ship, it brought him agony. But in that moment, Silas changed his thought. He looked at the debris and said, This is not a broken ship. These are the materials for a shelter. And then he looked at the rain clouds gathering and said, That is not a storm to curse, that is fresh water to drink. He stopped mourning what was gone and focused entirely on what was in front of him. Elias continued. He built a sturdy shelter. He caught rain in the canvas. He fashioned a spear from a splintered mast and caught fish. Because he changed his thoughts from despair to possibility, his body found the strength to survive. 6 months later, a passing naval ship spotted the smoke from his fire and rescued him. Clara, my dear, the man did not survive because the island magically changed. The island remained harsh and rocky. He survived because he changed his mind. When you focus on the disaster, you become paralyzed. When you focus on what you can do, you find your power. Clara sat in stunned silence. The story echoed in her mind, wrapping around her anxieties like a warm blanket. So, my thoughts are blinding me to what I can actually do, she whispered. Elias smiled broadly. Exactly. If you wake up tomorrow and say, We are doomed, Arthur is dead, we will freeze, your hands will be too weak to work, and your eyes will be too full of tears to see any opportunities. But if you wake up and say, I have my health, I have my sons, and today I will do whatever it takes to provide, you will find strength you never knew you had. Hope isn't ignoring the storm, Clara. Hope is knowing you can build a shelter. Clara stood up. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on her chest felt manageable. She thanked Elias, squeezing his hand before making the trek back down the cliff. The wind was still cold, her pantry was still nearly empty, but something fundamental had shifted within her. The next morning, Clara did not wake up with a gasp of panic. Before opening her eyes, she took a deep breath and whispered, "Today is a new day. I will find a way." She got out of bed, stoked the fire with the last of their wood, and looked around her cabin. She saw her loom. She didn't have enough fine wool for a large, expensive blanket, but she had baskets of coarse, leftover thread and scrap fabric she had deemed useless for years. Channeling the spirit of Captain Silas on the beach, Clara stopped seeing useless scraps. She saw materials. She spent the entire day weaving the scraps together, creating a thick, vibrant, uniquely patterned rug. It wasn't the fine, delicate work she usually did, but it was sturdy, beautiful, and incredibly warm. Her boys, sensing the shift in their mother's energy, stopped crying and began helping her sort the colored threads, laughing as they turned it into a game. The cabin, though cold, was suddenly filled with life. Clara worked late into the night, her hands moving with a frantic, joyful energy, fueled not by panic, but by purpose. By the end of the week, Clara had woven 3 large, colorful patchwork rugs. She took them to the town square on market day. While no one had the money for luxury blankets, a wealthy innkeeper from the next town over, passing through to check his properties, saw the thick, durable rugs. "These are incredible," he remarked, running his hand over the tight weave. "They are exactly what I need for the stone floors of my tavern to keep the winter draft out." He bought all 3 on the spot and commissioned 5 more, paying her handsomely in advance. Clara ran all the way home, her pockets heavy with coin, enough to buy firewood, fresh meat, and grain to last them the rest of the winter. 2 weeks later, as Clara was happily weaving by a roaring fire, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. She opened the door, and there, shivering but grinning from ear to ear, stood Arthur. He was bruised and looked exhausted, but his eyes shone with triumph. He explained that his ship had been delayed by a massive storm, forcing them to dock in a distant port for repairs. He had worked tirelessly in that port, saving every penny, but couldn't send word. He had finally secured passage back, bringing with him a substantial sum of money and a contract for regular carpentry work with the shipping guild. Clara held him tight, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. The next morning, Clara walked up to the lighthouse. She didn't cry this time. She brought Elias a small, freshly baked loaf of bread. "He's home, Elias. Arthur is home, and we have enough to survive the winter." Elias accepted the bread, the scent of fresh yeast making him smile. "I am so happy for you, Clara." Clara looked out at the ocean. "You saved my life, Elias. Your story changed everything." The old man chuckled, taking a bite of the warm bread. "I didn't change anything, Clara. You did. The storm was always going to pass, and your husband was always going to return. But because you changed your thoughts, you didn't just survive the wait, you grew stronger during it. Remember, my dear, the mind is the captain of your ship. Keep it steered toward the light, and you will weather any storm."